Welcome to exercise 2 of chapter 4. This exercise involves building a dynamic inventory management system to demonstrate advanced handling of reactive arrays and objects using $state and derived.by. The focus is on managing nested data structures and enabling user interactions to update, add, and manage inventory items efficiently. Pagination is implemented using a snippet for clean and reusable code. What you will learn: creating a reusable API utility for fetching data dynamically across endpoints, utilizing $state and derived.by to create and manipulate reactive arrays and derived values, dynamically adding, updating, and managing inventory data, including nested objects, implementing reactive calculations, such as total quantity and cost, in real time, practicing advanced reactivity in SvelteKit 5 with nested data structures, using snippets to simplify and reuse complex markup like pagination. Okay, so the objectives are advanced reactivity, dynamic data fetching, and inventory management. Now, you will need 3 files for this exercise, and you should find links to these below the video. 1. Copy the file sportItems.json to your static data folder. 2. Copy the file fetchutils.js to your libAPI folder. 3. Copy the file x2_invent.svelte to your libdata chapter for folder and add x2_invent to your exercise list.json file. Let's look at the data file first. You see that it is an array with objects. Within the object you see the details, which is a nested object with properties quantity and price. So these are all sports items, and this is the format we will be working with. Next, the fetchutils.js file. This is a generic, think reusable, fetch function. We may reuse this in later exercises or challenges. We have covered try, await, catch for fetch in the previous chapter, and now we are making this dynamic and reusable. In the main component, we will import fetch data and provide the endpoint data, which this will look for in the static folder. Okay, before we go through the main component, let's see this in action. I select chapter 4 and click the blue arrow next to for_2 Reactive Inventory. You should see a Manage Items title with summary details, a pagination indicator. Below this you will see a display of the items with quantity, price, and actions, delete. To the bottom you will see a green block for adding new items to the inventory. Please note that I am not updating the backend JSON data in this exercise, but only the local state items, so the updates do not persist. We will get to that later. And below this I repeat the pagination to avoid users having to scroll to top. So, that's the display. Now let's see what it does. First, click the pagination arrows. The display shows the next page of items. I only have 2 pages, so you can go any further than page 2. Next, click in the soccer ball quantity field and keep your eye on the totals under the Manage Items as you increase or decrease the inventory quantity. These are reactively updating, right? Reduce the quantity all the way to 0. Can go any lower. If you were doing a stock take, you may well find that you have no items for a particular item, so 0 is a valid amount. If you wanted to remove the item completely, then again keep an eye on those totals before you click the bin icon. Again, the totals reactively change. What else? Click in the item name field and note that you can change it. You wouldn't want these to be changed, right? Same thing for the price. You would, of course, in a full inventory system allow people with the required access level to do certain things like this. Okay, the last thing to check is the Add New Item. Enter football, quantity 1 and price 50 and click the plus icon. You should see a warning that this item already exists and you should just update the quantity instead. Note the total for the unique items, 12. Now add new item baseball glove, quantity 6, price 60 and click the plus icon. The item should now be displayed in the correct alphabetical order in the list, but the total for unique items should now show 13, so even though we added 6 baseball gloves, it's only 1 unique item. You might notice that the pagination also changed now to page 1 of 3 instead of page 1 of 2. Click the arrow to page 3. Now, with a bigger inventory, you might want to add a double arrow icon to skip to the beginning or end of your list. I will leave that challenge to you. Okay, so that's the reactive inventory in use. Now, let's look at the code. Open up x2_invent.svelte. First, we import the API, declare state for and populate the items array. We declare state for net item and for the pagination, current page and items per page. Next, we use a $derived.by, which is similar to the $derived but can handle more complex scenarios with multiple dependencies. Note that $derived.by, unlike $derived, returns a computed value, not a function. Here the displayed item list can be affected by the items array and the current page. We are also slicing and sorting, making it a more complex scenario. And that is why I am using $derived.by. If you find that $derived does not produce the expected result, then try derived.by with no other change being needed. Next, I'm using $derived to get a list of unique names, which I will use in the add new item function to ensure a duplicate is not added. Note that you could also use $derived.by here instead of just $derived. You can change the code and try this, but don't forget that if you do this, that unique item names will then return a value, an array, and not a function, so you would have to remove the round brackets where this is used. I am going to use $derived here as I wanted to show the difference here between $derived.by and $derived. Next, I have several functions. I am not going to explain each of these functions as they are fairly straightforward. But I have a few comments. Function add item. As the name implies, allows you to add a new item in the green block section. If you simply wanted to increase an existing item, you click in the quantity field. So this is for adding new items only. So we need to check that the name entered does not already exist in the items array. Since we have the derived unique item names with round brackets as this is a function, we use this to check if the name entered is included in this unique list, and if it is, you get an alert. An alternative approach, if you didn't have the unique item names, derived function would be to iterate through the items array and check if the name exists. I included the code, commented out, for that check. If the item doesn't exist, it's given an ID and pushed to the array and inputs cleared. Since items gets updated, then the reactive display gets updated. Now you may be wondering, well, okay, displayed items is derived, so it's reactive, so any changes to it will be re-rendered. But what about the totals? We are not using derived for these, so how are these being re-rendered? Good question. Svelte tracks dependencies. The functions used in the totals line depend on the items array, as we will see in a minute. Therefore, when items changes, Svelte will automatically tracks where items is being used and updates re-renders. Next, function update item. This is called when the quantity is changed. If the item is found, it will have the quantity updated. Remember, in the JSON structure, this is a nested object. That is why I have the code items itemindex.details.quantity equals quantity. The item index is the top level ID. The .details takes you down a level to the nested details object. The .quantity is the property of the .details nested object. Okay, now with the update and remove functions, you might ask, why do we need to check if the item exists when we are displaying the items? So of course they exist. Well, that is correct, and we could just use the item ID directly. However, in a networked environment where other users could have already amended or deleted the item you have on your screen, then it's more robust to recheck for existence. As mentioned above, the functions for total, quantity, and cost depend on the items array, and Svelte tracks dependencies. So that's the script. Now the markup. In the markup, I start with declaring a snippet because I want the pagination shown at the top and bottom of screen for user convenience, so rather than duplicate this markup twice, I use a snippet. I then display the heading, totals line, and call render for the pagination snippet. Next, I loop through the displayed items, which is the reactive array from the derived.by rune, so is always current, based on its dependencies. Note that the name and price items are read-only. Note also that as we are dealing with an array of nested objects from the JSON file, the $derived.by is similarly returning a nested structure. So, when displaying the item name, that is simply item.name, but when displaying the item quantity, THA comes from the item.details.quantity. Changing this quantity triggers the onInput event, which calls the updateItem function. Included here is a button using FontAwesome icon for trash can. This has an onClick event, which calls the removeItem function. Next, we have the green block Add New Item section. Note that we declared state for new item to be the same structure of a nested object, so we refer to the details section. Finally, we render again the pagination snippet. And that is a wrap on exercise 2 of chapter 4. I hope you found that interesting. If some parts were heavy going, take some time to review those so you get a better understanding. Play around with the code. Try changing the derived.by to derived. Try adding the double arrows icon to go direct to first or last page. Experiment, learn, get comfortable with the code. Much of this exercise we have covered in earlier code, and I am gradually pulling these together and adding new topics to keep you challenged and engaged. Please like, comment and subscribe. Drop me an email on any issues, suggestions, alternative code. Are you ready for another exercise? If so, that will be coming up in the next video. See you there.